So what I'd love to do is to be able to have some sort of dialogue at the end. So I'll run through some concepts and basic ideas, and then open up the floor, and hopefully, any of your questions that we have through, we can talk through. So first of all, what is the focus here? It's really to think about mental health. So mental health, often when it's talked about, people immediately go to the negative. We think of all the things that are problematic. Whereas if I say to somebody physical health, they're more likely to think of, oh, what things will I do to keep myself physically healthy? So we want to come to that place where we see mental health very much the same way as
dáadáa
as physical health.
ìmọ̀ ibi tí
So something that is actually going to ensure that we are able to adapt, go through life without too many difficulties, too many problems. So, what is stress? Stress is something that is a very whole body experience. It's not just something in our minds, because often when we talk to people and we say, oh, stress, they think, oh, it's in your mind. It's actually, science is showing us it's actually a whole body experience. So when something, you know, comes through to you, like you have an experience, the way you look at that experience will have an impact in your brain. So that will then send all the messages through your brain, release of hormones, and then you'll find that actually you're physically reacting, your emotions have changed, even your thinking starts to change. But the thing about stress, it's actually important. We need stress because stress, to some extent, keeps you focused, it keeps you paying attention, it keeps you really very much aware of what is happening to you. So, for example, if you were crossing a very busy road, there would be an element of stress. So, you would notice your heart rate might increase, your attention is really focused on where the car is coming from. That is actually a level of a stress reaction. So, some stress is necessary and it's good for us, but it's a balance. If the stress is too much, then we start to experience difficulties. So we want to think of stress as, if you have a bank account and you keep drawing on it, and it goes into the red, it starts to be a problem for you. So really what you want to be doing is managing the stress. But when the stress becomes too much, when we think that we are facing a situation and we don't have what we need to deal with it, that is where our stress levels increase to a point where we then start to struggle. Because essentially you think, I don't have, what it takes, I don't have the tools, I'm not going to be able to manage the situation. And that is when you move more into the state of panic, of worry. Sometimes you can't sleep, you can't eat, because you are really moving into a state where your body, your brain, everything is really reacting to this information coming in, and you feel as if you're not going to be able to manage the situation. So that often when people say, I'm stressed, that is usually the kind of scenario that they're describing. So, very much that sense of it's a whole, all-encompassing thing. So it's not just in your mind, and it is about a situation where you feel like, what's coming? I don't think I can deal with this. And that can be in all areas of our lives. And actually, at times, it can be in multiple areas. So maybe sometimes it's about work, maybe sometimes relationship, maybe children, or friendships, all sorts of things. But sometimes all those things and different things can combine. And then the stress builds and actually becomes something that can feel as if you can't see a way through at all. And that is where people can start to move off into other difficulties. So we may have depression, we may have, anxiety, we may have relationships breaking down because people are just in that place where they can't see a way through. Now, something that is actually really useful, right? Because when we're talking about stress and, mental health, it's always important to know that there are things we can do. There are ways to understand. So yes, we're saying stress has its advantages, but when stress becomes difficult for us, when stress becomes problematic, it's always helpful to understand that there are ways to understand what's going on, and then there are ways to manage it and deal with it. So we've talked about this idea of a tipping point, this idea that at some point the balance tips and things just become too much, they become overwhelming. So understanding our own personal situations. So different people can deal with different situations in different ways. Some people may experience exam stresses as, oh, this is something I can manage, and other people feel overwhelmed. Some people can deal with financial pressures differently to other people. So really, we want to start getting that sense of our own personal reactions to things, our own personalities, our own backgrounds. All those things are going to determine what we individually find stressful. So that's the first thing I would say we really want to start paying attention to. It's not what somebody else tells us is stressful, it's what we ourselves experience as stressful. So often that can be very disheartening. Sometimes we try and share something we're worried about, and people kind of say, oh, but that's not a big deal. I don't understand why you're worried about that. But for you, it's something that you're struggling with. So firstly, is that acceptance that you have your own set of things that you tend to find difficult. And then remembering that, this is very much a physical thing. So your body also tends to hold the feelings that you have. So often you'll come across people who, for years, they've been under stress, but haven't really recognized it or been able to get the help they need. And they're reporting all kinds of physical difficulties, sometimes irritable bowel syndromes and gastro issues, chronic back pain, chronic headaches. All these kinds of things can actually be long-term symptoms and experiences of stress that is held in the body and actually starts to deteriorate our physical health. So we really want to get a sense of, in our own selves, personality wise, body wise, emotion, what actually impacts us. So my state might be that normally I feel relatively healthy, and then I may notice, oh, over a period of time, I'm starting to have lots of colds, lots of headaches, I just want to sleep all the time. Those can be signs that actually physically there is something that I need to pay attention to. There may be things that are creating stresses in me that my body is reacting to. So that may be one way of telling that something is going on that I really want to pay attention to. The other thing we tend to notice is our mood. Right? That can be a really good indicator. And often the thing you will find is that, again, different people respond very differently to stresses. Some people may withdraw and become very quiet and, just want to be by themselves, away from all the things that create the stresses. And other people, you may become what we call more reactive. So it doesn't take much and they are blowing up. It doesn't take much and they're, maybe breaking down in tears or becoming very angry and shouting. Or, some people may seem very depressed, very low in mood. These can all be signs of stresses in our lives, things in our lives that are creating a demand that we feel like we are not going to be able to meet or we're struggling to meet. We may notice changes in concentration, focus, attention. Maybe we're at work and our minds just keep drifting. They just keep drifting. That in itself can become stressful. You may have deadlines coming up, your boss is asking for something, your colleague is waiting for something, and you can't concentrate. That in itself starts to create additional stress. So you notice in your functioning that these things can start to shift. That general feeling of being overwhelmed all the time, like small things get added in and it just feels like, what, my head is about to explode. You can't ask me for any more because already I'm struggling to manage, I'm struggling to cope. So those feelings of being overwhelmed, right? Like we say, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's one of those situations where it can seem like the small stresses. So I'm there and somebody comes to ask me for something very simple. And that may be the thing that sends me, shouting or crying or just telling them, you're always worrying me, I can't deal with this. Those can be real important signs that things are just too much for you. And then we can move into this very difficult place of feeling very hopeless and very helpless. So if this goes on for long enough, we can just start to feel like it's never going to change. I'm always going to be in this situation. I'm never going to be able to work it out. More things start happening, and we can start to feel really pushed down over time. So these are all the sorts of signs that we want to be looking out for, both in ourselves and in the people around us. So again, remembering that things that may seem manageable to one person are not that way for another. And sometimes things just tend to group in life, and we have a situation where multiple things are happening all at the same time, and then we can start to experience difficulties. So those are the things we want to look out for when we say that, stress is becoming unhealthy. So one of the ways we tend to try and help people to break things down, or, if I'm working with somebody, one of the things I want to really understand, first of all, is look, what's going on in your life right now? So we start to think through, what are some of the things that may have changed? What are some of the things that, I may be concerned about? What are some of the things that maybe it's not even my own personal stress, but somebody around me is struggling with something? Looking wider, looking at the things that are going on, the things that are coming up, and also what are my beliefs about how I should be responding to this situation? Because that also is important and can tell us a lot about how we end up managing a situation. So someone's thoughts, someone's beliefs, those are things we actually want to understand. We want to understand those things for ourselves also. Often a big part of stress is that we are often brought up to believe that we should manage everything. We shouldn't be stressed by things. That is a stressful thing in itself, right? So when you're struggling, now you're judging yourself like, oh, I don't understand why I'm struggling with this because I should be able to manage it. But then I'm not managing it. So then instead of finding a way to really deal with it, I start to feel very stuck, very down, very bad. And then I can't even ask for help, maybe because I'm starting to feel quite ashamed that I'm actually even struggling with this thing in the first place. So really starting to get that idea of, what are my expectations of myself? Like, what is it I think I can cope with, I can manage, I can deal with, so that we can start to understand what things we need to manage differently. Noticing our own feelings. So like I said, the signs that our mood has shifted, the signs that maybe we're constantly feeling this sense of worry, anxiety, we're not feeling right in ourselves, our mood has shifted and changed. Again, it's taking that time to notice that and to start to explore what might be going on for us at this point in time. Paying attention to our behaviors, right? So maybe noticing we're more snappy than usual. If you're a parent, your child comes to ask you for something, and you're not responding in the way that you normally would. You're shouting more. You're less available. You're withdrawing more. Maybe in your relationship, you're finding that you're just not very present with your partner. You are arguing more, you are upset more, things just tend to get to you more easily. These sorts of things can be important. Maybe you're noticing also lapses in concentration, so you're making more mistakes than usual in your job or in other things you're doing. It's usually a sign that things are too much for you. So there's a lot there to think about in terms of, what can contribute, what can stress look like, how can it show up in our lives. And stress can be something that is short term, as in, it may be there present for a day or two. And it can be something that is there for a prolonged period of time. Stress, like I said, is a normal reaction to things, it demands that come in the door. So things come in, we react, we respond. Stress is part of that. If this starts becoming very commonly present, like something that is not shifting, it's always there, it's usually a sign that we need to extend and ask for help. But I think, first of all, we need to sort of be aware of that. So, how can we actually manage stress? This is one of the things that, we know that there are lots of very useful strategies out there. But before I explain, some of these ideas, it's really important to know, there is a nerve that runs from your brain straight into your body and back again. And it's like a motorway. It sends traffic both ways, from our body to our brain, from our brain to our body. And so information is coming in. And sometimes we're so busy, we're not even noticing what is happening. We're not even aware of what's going on. So first of all, we want to recognize. If we can recognize there's a change, we can recognize something is going on, great, because we actually have the beginnings of being able to do something about it, right? So first of all, we want to be able to recognize. And then secondly, accept, right? Because if we're fighting the feeling and we're fighting everything and telling ourselves, oh, this shouldn't be, and we shouldn't be like that, we shouldn't be thinking this, feeling this, it's hard because we are just resisting something that is actually going on for us. So being able to accept the feelings, allow them to be present, allow yourself to notice them and accept them and acknowledge them is a very important step. Then when we've done that, we want to start investigating, like I said earlier. So you want to start noticing, what's changed for me, what's going on for me, what could it be that's creating these feelings of stress and worry and anxiety? And then we want to nurture, we want to look after, we want to do something that is going to help us to be able to feel differently about the situation, about what is going on for us. So if we think about the steps that I've talked about, there's a nice way that we tend to refer to it as, it's an acronym and it just stands for RAIN. So the R is the recognize, the A is accept or allow, the I is investigate, and the N is nurture. So we have the term RAIN, right? So if we can think about that going through our daily lives, in general, it's a very good way to think about our mental health because we want to be aware, we want to be present, we want to be noticing, we want to be taking action with certain things. So what I'd like to start talking you through is just some of the simple, they sound simple, but they are very useful, very important ideas that we can use to manage our stress levels. And I'd like you to think about this analogy of like if we have a bucket, right, and we have a level in it that is, let's say, midway, right, and more water keeps coming into this bucket. At some point, it's going to get to a place where it can't take any more, and any more water coming in is going to lead to overflow. So all the things that I'm going to describe for us that we can do are just a way of being able to keep letting some of this pressure, some of this water out of the bucket. So there's always space to take new demands, new pressure, and be able to balance everything and feel like we're okay and we're not overly stressed. So one of the things is to think about doing daily things that keep us feeling more able to manage our stress levels, right? So instead of letting things build and then feel like they're too much, trying to put things into our day, and they don't have to be big things, but it can be maybe saying, look, I will take 10 minutes in the morning where I'm just going to, really do some stretching. I'm going to do some journaling. So I'll write down, how I'm feeling about things. Those kinds of practices that work for you. They'll be individual, they'll be unique, but they'll be things that are important to you. For some people, it might be saying, look, I'm going to, spend time midway through the day and I'll take a break from my desk and I'll go and have a chat with a friend or have something nice to eat for lunch, but I'll make sure I take that break during the day so I can actually release some of my stress levels. So I want you to also think about whatever actions and choices you make about how you're going to manage your stress. Trying to do it on a regular basis, a daily basis, is much more effective than trying to now manage a big feeling, a big pile of stress that has built up over time. So exercise. And I know we hear this a lot, the benefits of exercise. Yes, it has very important physical benefits, but it also releases certain, hormones, certain chemicals in our brains that actually allow us to reduce the stress. They actually remove some of the stress hormones that are building up in our brains. But physically, they also help us to, engage in things like, breathing properly, actually releasing some of the built up energy that is in our bodies. So that also can have that nice calming effect. Sometimes when you do some exercise, you realize actually I sleep better because I'm physically tired, but actually I don't feel so pent up and so built up. And that can be a much more positive experience. So physical exercise, it doesn't have to be anything strenuous. You don't have to be lifting big weights in the gym or anything for that to count. You can take a walk, you can do some stretching, you can do some yoga. You can do any of these things that actually are just release for your body and also that are listening to what you're able to manage and tolerate. We say 30 minutes of exercise in a day is ideal. Anything beyond that, great if you can fit it in. So sleep is another important one. But again, that can go hand in hand. When you're stressed, sometimes it's hard to sleep. And the less you sleep, the more stressed you become, and round and round and round we go. So when we are feeling really stressed, I guess we know that our sleep can be impacted, but it's trying to get and make room for as much sleep as we can get. Sometimes we're trying to burn the candle at both ends, burn the midnight oil, stay up late trying to get things done, waking up early to start the day ahead. The difficulty with that is that, your stress levels can really build, which starts to affect the things you're trying to do, the changes you're trying to make. So we want to try and get into healthy sleep habits where we're getting, let's say ideally at least 8 hours of sleep a night, if we can manage that. A good diet, there are certain aspects of our diet that they're important for us. They help us to be able to manage a lot of these hormones that are running around in our body and creating stress. So, making sure that we have a good healthy diet, and when people say healthy diet, I think people start to think, you have to eat vegetables and this and this and this. But I think actually a healthy diet is just everything in moderation, making sure you're not eating too much, making sure you're eating a varied amount of things because your body needs all that important nutrient to actually be able to function and keep you working physically. We also want to be thinking about things like social support, right? When things are hard, it can be tempting to just back away from people, to cut off from people because, you know what, my head just feels too full right now. I don't even want to share what I'm going through. I don't even know how to talk about it. Like I was saying earlier, sometimes our belief systems can tell us that, we should be coping. And so because of that, we feel ashamed to talk to other people about what's going on for us. And what we really want to do is to ensure that we have a social network that is open and honest, where we can actually talk about what's going on. And sometimes that talking can be even just sharing a laugh, having fun, just thinking about, okay, what's going on generally. It doesn't always have to be about heavy things, but when you are starting to find things difficult, it can be really useful if you're able to share about this. My own experience personally, as a parent of two young kids, I often notice that moms will not truly share what they're struggling with because they're worried about being judged by others. And that applies to everyone, not just parents, right? Maybe at work you're struggling with something, or in your studies you're struggling with something. You think if I tell somebody, they'll judge me, they'll think negatively of me. So you hold it. But it builds up over time, and then you're struggling to manage in the end. So having a few trusted people that you can confide in is actually a very, very positive thing for our mental health in general, but especially when we're trying to manage stresses. Something else that tends to happen is that we hold a lot of things in our head, right? And when something is in your head, it's very, very hard to work it through clearly, because what happens is that as you're trying to think of the solution, some other thing comes in and other things just tend to pile up. So it can be really difficult to think it through. So writing things down Right? It doesn't have to be, written in a long list. It can just be a few words of things that are just in your mind, taking up space, creating this kind of build up of stress. Writing things down allows you to look at things differently. You can start to see, okay, actually, maybe this one is the same or similar to this part and is linked to this thing. And as you do that, you can also start to think about, okay, how do I want to deal with these things that I think are problems? What can I do to tackle each one of these things? And then you can move to things like being able to prioritize, list them in order of significance. Like, which one do I need to figure out immediately? Which one can wait? Which one can I ask somebody to help me with? These things start to become clearer when we write down, when we can see things there. And then we start to understand, look, okay, maybe I can I can problem solve things in a different way. So remember we were saying stress is that belief that we don't have the resources to meet the demand, right? And sometimes that's something that is actually created because of the way we're looking at a problem, being able to see it differently. It helps us to kind of release and free up and think of, okay, what could be really useful. So those are just some of the ideas. There are many different ways of dealing and approaching stress. I know that, your faith is actually another really, really important way of dealing with stress, because what you're able to do there is really acknowledge what you're going through, what you're struggling with, and then have that confidence and that hope that, what, there is help, and, these things can be resolved. These things will pass. Having that hope that this can change is really, really important. So, there is definitely an importance and a place for your faith, for your belief that there is help, right, available. But that shouldn't block you from being able to now also talk to the people around you, to access the support from the people around you. So please, there is every positive in being able to share and talk about these things, as well as holding your faith. We can't see it as one pushes the other one out. It's all part of coping. It's all part of managing. It's why we have friends and family and other supports that are there for us. So what I would like to do just before we move to taking any kind of questions you have, I just would like to draw your mind to two nice techniques that I often try and teach people in the work that I do. So one of the things that we use it all the time, we have it, it's free, is our breath, right? The reason your breathing is important, especially when you're stressed, is that it sends oxygen to your brain. When you're stressed, actually the oxygen starts to sort of go to, and the blood rushes to other parts of your body to get you ready to, we call it's fight or flight, to either run away or to stay and fight and deal with the situation, or sometimes you just freeze. You don't even know what to do, so you're just stuck. So when we start to take deep breaths in, what it actually does, it relaxes our body, but it also sends signals to the brain to tell it that, you know what, we're safe, we can manage, this is okay. And when we're stressed, we tend to breathe up here, right in your chest. You're not breathing around your ribs and you're not sending the oxygen through your body, right? So one of the first things to try and train yourself to do is notice how you're breathing, right? Check yourself throughout the day. Like, what is my breathing feeling like? Is it tight? Is my chest tight? Is my back tight? Is my stomach clenched? Those are really good signs that your stress is building, right? When you stop, when you take a deep breath, I will also want you to pay attention to, as you take your breath in through your nose, you really want it to fill up. You imagine filling up your chest, pushing your rib cage out so you can actually feel it expanding. And then when you breathe out through your nose, it's more of a push, experience. You notice everything kind of come back together. Doing that, a couple of times, maybe 2, 3 times, making sure you're taking a deep breath. It can take you all of a minute, right? But that can really recharge your body. It can recharge your brain. It gives you a good break. The other thing that I like to teach people is also something called grounding. It's bringing yourself back into the present, because when you're stressed, what tends to happen is your brain scatters. It goes to all the future problems, it goes to all the things that have gone wrong in the past, and you're losing traction with, look, I'm here right now. This is the only thing I can actually deal with and control, is what's happening for me right now. So when we're doing this practice of taking a deep breath in and out, we want to then start noticing our surroundings. So we bring ourselves, our attention back to, this is where I am, this is what's going on. So sometimes it's nice to take a minute, go somewhere quiet, practice the taking the deep breath. You can do it maybe, you're parked in your car sitting waiting for somebody, or you've just gone off to, I don't know, have a bathroom break or whatever it may be. Take a few minutes aside, away. Take some deep breaths. Intentionally slow everything down. Your brain, your mind is racing, your heart is beating. You want to slow everything down by breathing deeply. And then just start to notice. Notice 5 things you can see around you, in the room, wherever you are. Just look, 5 things I can see. Notice, maybe 3 things I can touch. Is it the seat? Is it my clothes? Is it noticing 3 things I can touch? Then we might want to notice 5 things we can hear. Just taking that time to be quiet enough to hear what's going on around us. And then 2 things I can smell. So we want to use all our senses, our 5 senses, right? And the last one might be just noticing what's the taste I have in my mouth. This is a really nice way of bringing ourselves back to ourselves in that moment. So we're not somewhere far away dealing with like stresses about things that haven't even happened yet, may not even happen, but things that nonetheless we're stressing and worrying about. Okay, so I will stop there, and hopefully, there's, information in there that you can actually take away with and use. But by all means, if there are any questions, I will be more than happy to answer anything there.
Thank you very much. This is like a therapy we've had this evening. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the deep explanation you have given to us this evening. But before we go into question, I want you to take that rain again. We talk about the how recognize, the I investigate, but the A and N. What's the A? What's
Okay.
the N?
So the A is accept or allow, really, just to allow that the feelings are there, accept that they're there. And then the N is to nurture, to look after ourselves, to do the things we need to do to essentially like soothe that feeling, to deal with that feeling rather than blocking it, pushing it away, pretending it's not there. Yeah, so that's really what it stands for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Uh,
you.
we're in the hour of question now. So I'll leave the room open. If you have question, you can just raise your hand so that I can call you to ask your question. I believe this is what is a big issue to a lot of people, especially if you are a Lagosian. You understand what it means, the stress of traffic, staying for hours, and a lot of stress past 3 years. So the door is open, the floor is open. Let's ask our question. You have the floor, ma.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. That was a very informative session. So I would like to ask, in a situation where you can't take away the source of your stress, what do you do? Probably you're in a relationship, a stressful relationship, of course, maybe a marital relationship, you can't do away with your partner, or it's a colleague at work, it's your boss or something. What do you recommend we do? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question, because that's often a reality, isn't it? Like we can't avoid and run away from all our stresses. Sometimes they are just there. I think in those situations, we really want to be thinking about how we're managing things, how we're managing ourselves, how we are ensuring that we're nurturing ourselves, we're looking after ourselves. So if you know, for example, that things are difficult for you at home in your relationship, it's making sure that you have some kind of outlet. It's making sure, you have some support around you. So maybe there is somebody you can confide in regularly, get some support, get some advice from. You're making sure you're trying to eat well, take care of yourself physically, rest as much as you can. In those sorts of situations, you're really essentially trying to manage things so that they don't come to a level where it's too much for you, and then you're moving into, other distresses. The other thing I would always say as well is sometimes the thing that is getting to us is we're trying to control how other people are responding. That is a very stressful situation, right? So you can only do what you can do, and then what the other person does, that's not something you can personally control. Sometimes relinquishing, letting go of that need to control how the other person is going to respond or behave or act, it's important, because what it does is it frees up space in your own mind to focus on yourself, what you need to do to keep yourself grounded in that moment, how you need to look after yourself, how you choose to respond to things that are happening. Those things are going to be really, really important. So those would definitely be two of the things that I would suggest can be useful in these types of situations that you describe, where we can't really necessarily change it so easily. So we're managing the situation, we're trying to cope.
Thank you. We have another hand up. Please, you can go ahead and ask a question.
Fikile?
Thank you. So I wanted to ask, if you are a student and you're studying, so there is too much pressure, there's so much work to be done, there's assignment after assignment, what do you do? Because it's giving stress so many times. What should I do?
Okay, thank you for that. And yes, that is definitely a familiar stress. So first of all, I want to say that, you're not alone. So many people are going through this, and do go through this. I would say maybe one of the things we can do, and maybe you've done this already, but is regularly make a list, make a plan, right? First of all, write down all the things that you are needing to do, that you are worrying about, like bring them out of your head onto a piece of paper, like just literally write the things down. Write down your worries, write down the things that you need to do, and then actually look at the things you need to do and try and see if you can, we call prioritize, put things in order of, okay, which things if I don't do is going to be, terrible. Which things can I do to a point, and then it's going to be okay. One of the things that is often a problem when we're studying, or difficulties, we're trying to achieve this kind of perfectionism. Everything has to be 100%. And actually, it's such a way that in reality, nothing can really ever be 100%, right? So all we can do is to try and do our best. So, there may be an area where, okay, I need to study more on this topic than this topic. Starting to see it mapped out can be a really useful way of being able to prioritize. And then you sort of, you commit time, like I'm going to do things in a certain way at a certain time. Sometimes also having that clarity of how you're going to approach the issue. And then from that, you might also see, look, this subject, this topic, I can't do by myself. I really don't understand. I'm going to need help from somebody. So starting to see it more clearly, and also looking at the things that you're worried about in a very clear way, can just release some of the pressure in your own head, but can also give you some practical ideas of, okay, what is it I'm going to be doing that's going to help me to manage this situation. But also don't forget the self-care, really important. So You might be tended to think, I will stay up late every night and I will study. You're going to be so tired. Your stress levels are going to build, your concentration is going to go down. So we want to try and balance that. So making sure you're sleeping well, making sure you're trying to eat well, making sure you're trying to get some exercise, and also taking a break. Because I think sometimes the tendency is I can't break from this. I need to work constantly. It's not sustainable. And actually over time, you actually become less effective at what you're doing. So hopefully that's some useful ideas for that.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
We have the last question will be taken. We have a question in the chat box. What are your suggestions for a child that often gets emotionally stressed or overwhelmed?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really, it's a really useful one because it does come up a lot. I think it's important there to really be aware of maybe what is creating the stresses. Remember, we talk about this idea of the bucket, like things becoming too much. So children, I always say, if we think about it's another acronym. I clearly like my acronyms, but if you talk about the acronym HALT, it's hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Sometimes, in certain situations, it can be that maybe your child is physically not feeling able to take on the stimulation and deal with things. So then they have this kind of overwhelm and the meltdown. Sometimes there may be things going around in the environment. It could be school. It could be, something has gone on at school that day and they've come home. And so just trying to think of what are all the things that are going into this child's buckets, right? This idea of what's filling their heads, what's taking their energy, what's actually making it so that by the time it comes to being able to deal with the next demand, too much. They're done, they're out, they've clocked out, they're shouting, they're screaming, or they're just withdrawn. Because it's usually a sign that there is something creating an overwhelm, like it's too much. And sometimes there are some, we call them like developmental things we need to pay attention to. So, things that we actually want to go and get some professional help with. But also the age of a child. Think about the age of your child. Younger children don't yet know how to manage their stress. So we need to help them. So we want to almost be that observer. When we see, look, they seem to start building and they're becoming less, they're not listening as much, then we want to actually help them to bring the level down. So you might say, look, come and sit with me, let's just have a quiet moment. Or actually, I can see when it comes to 6 o'clock in the evening, you start to misbehave. So you know what, we're going to try and get to bed earlier. Watching when have they had a meal? Do they need a snack? Do they need a drink? Those are the sorts of things we want to do because younger children, up until the age of about, I would say realistically 6, 7, it's very hard for them to, manage their own feelings. So we really need to be stepping in to support. And then the older children and the teenagers, I guess we know they're also having a lot of their stresses. So we want to give them that support, that space to be able to diffuse, to talk about things, and to help them also to do some of the things I've talked about today, problem solving, supporting, those are things that will over time help. But the biggest one is that communication with your child, knowing that when they're struggling, they can come to you. Even if that's a young child who is crying or an older child who is struggling with something at school or friendships, whatever, they can come and they know you'll help them. I think those can be things overall that are really important. But yes, and thank you for noting that the meaning of the acronym in the chat because that's actually a really useful one to bear in mind.
Thank you very much. At this point, we'll be rounding up with this edition of Stress Management, the key to healthy living. And from this discussion, we can see that really we can manage our stress, we will not have any issue with our heads. And in line with this, and in line with what this platform stands for, to give hope And that is why we bring different topics to bring hope that talks about different issues and different areas of life. And that's why we are talking about AIDS in this season. But also, as we talk about our head, talk about our career, we also talk about our relationship with our God, our creator, because in him we have completeness and in him we have everything. So if there's anybody here that doesn't have an encounter with the Lord yet, can give God a chance in your hearts, just confess your sins to him, to accept him as a Lord and personal Savior, and to believe he can forgive you, and then to begin to enjoy fellowship with him. And with this, we've come to the end of October edition of a discussion. I want to appreciate our guests for giving us this loaded package within the short invitation. She was able to deliver so much for us. Really appreciate your time, really appreciate your efforts, and want to appreciate all the guests, all our participants in today's edition. Thanks for always coming. Because of your presence, you always encourage us to continue. We value you, we appreciate you, and we also want you to extend this love to others by sharing this link whenever it's out with our friends and our loved ones. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful night rest.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
for
much.
joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me. Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Bye.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you so much.